Tonight, New York State Assembly Speaker Shelley Silver making headlines after being hit with felony corruption charges. What is next, not just for Silver, but the governor as well as Albany? Our panel will weigh in. And it is still early, but Florida Senator Marco Rubio and Vice President Joe Biden say they're not ruling out a run for the White House. Is Rubio really ready to try and woo Republicans, especially with another Florida Republican with his eyes on the White House? And who has what it takes to take on Hillary? Plus, Ed Mullins, president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association, singing a different tune today, trying to smooth things over with the mayor. And the rift between the City Hall and Police Plaza is something starting to simmer on what might be behind the defrost. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thanks a lot for joining us. We're going to start, obviously, with bombshell that came down this week as it related to Shelley Silver and the accusations laid against him. We're going to break it into a few parts, both the legal charges and then also some of the political fallout. His arrest is one of the state's most powerful politicians, putting pressure potentially on the governor or the state leaders to tackle what many people has found to be a really flawed, if not broken, system of politics and conflicts of interest. Now, Shelley Silver, he is, as you know, facing federal charges. The 70-year-old is charged on 5 counts of conspiracy, fraud, and extortion, which altogether carry up to 100 years in prison. Silver released on $200,000 bail Thursday and said he was confident that he will be vindicated. The U.S. Attorney, Preet Bharara, says Silver took nearly $4 million in payoffs and kickbacks.
The complaint charges Speaker Silver in 5 counts with corruptly seeking legal business from a handful of people and entities with significant business or interests before the state, and then corruptly profiting from the legal fees that were paid. All told, we allege that Silver corruptly collected some $4 million in bribes and kickbacks disguised as referral fees. Those disguised bribes and kickbacks account for approximately 2/3 of all of Silver's outside income since 2002.
Now, authorities claim that Silver used his power to convince 2 real estate developers to hire a Manhattan real estate firm, which just coincidentally paid Silver $700,000 for the referrals. Authorities also say Silver directed another $500,000 in state grants, that's taxpayer money, to pay for the research of an oncologist who then refers asbestos victims to a law firm that in turn, again, coincidentally, paid Silver nearly $4 million for referrals and another $1.4 million for legal work, which officials say he never performed.
These charges, in our view, go to the very core of what ails Albany: lack of transparency, lack of accountability, and lack of principle, joined with an overabundance of greed, cronyism, and self-dealing. And so our unfinished fight against public corruption continues. You should stay tuned.
Stay tuned here. An idea that we have only heard the beginning of this. We're going to get into, as I said, a lot of politics could come down. But let's bring in our panel here. Mike Morey, Senior Vice President of Public Relations at SKD Knickerbocker, and before that, spokesperson for the Christine Quinn mayoral campaign, also a communications director to Senator Chuck Schumer. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Bill Aronwald, criminal defense attorney, former federal prosecutor and former prosecutor as well. And Andrew Whitman here, our senior political correspondent. He joins us. And Bill, I want to start with you. It was compelling to read the indictment, even for somebody who doesn't read it like you do. You have kick the feet up and have some popcorn. And then the press conference that went along with it. What jumped out at you most? Was it the scope, or I mean, how significant some of the allegations were as to what Silver allegedly did?
Well, first, this is not an indictment, which in and of itself is curious. Ordinarily, in a case like this, the U.S. Attorney's Office will proceed by grand jury indictment. What the prosecutor's done in this case is he's filed a 35-page complaint concerning 5 separate criminal charges, and the complaint sets forth a whole lot of information that would never find its way into an indictment. So one has to ask themselves, why are we dealing with a complaint, which is usually the precursor to an indictment? Usually complaints are filed when someone is arrested right away, or there's some statute of limitations issue, there's some compelling reason, which isn't the case here. So the charges are certainly serious. The one area that I think is the most concerning is the fact that relates to the real estate issue. Not so much with respect to the monies he received from the personal injury firm. The one with the real estate is interesting only because that was income he did not report on the financial disclosure form, and he should have. With respect to the law firm, Whites and Luxembourg, the only thing that's of any concern there is the business that he was referring for the asbestos litigation, which came to him from a doctor who had requested money to fund research into asbestos litigation from the law firm. They refused. He was then steered to Silver, according to the complaint allegations. Silver said, you know.
And by the way, he's cooperating with the feds. He's got an immunity to the doctor.
That's another thing too. You know, they're identifying to some extent who's cooperating. You don't see that either in an indictment. So what I take away from all of this is, it seems to me that this is like a first salvo that's being fired by the U.S. attorney in the hope that Silver, when he reads this and when his lawyer reads this, will get a much clearer picture as to the breadth and scope of the government's evidence, in the hope that maybe Silver will work out some sort of a disposition. But I think that you have to understand that there's nothing illegal about him being of counsel to a law firm. In fact...
Okay, but wait one second. Now, let me just put this into the general parlance of the layperson out there. We say, Bill, hold on a second. This guy isn't just an elected official. Mm-hmm. This guy, if anybody knows how New York works, he's one of the 3 men in the room. Nothing gets through the assembly if it doesn't have his blessing. Mm-hmm. He takes $500 grand of taxpayer money out of a discretionary fund that he decides how to use, decides to give it to an oncologist. And the implication certainly from this is, hey, doc, here's the money to do it. Anybody who comes in here, you're going to direct them to my firm. Not just my firm, you're going to direct it. I'm not going to do any legal work on it, but at the end of the day, $3.9 million are going to go in my pocket here as basically a quid pro quo. I give you the money, you steer them to me, and there we go. On the real estate, just like you said, the same kind of thing. Uses the extortion. I mean, look at the language, not me here. You've got the U.S. attorney saying this, that he's using the power and influence of his office to direct it to him where he does no work, but yet he collects fees. And everybody knows the implication that you play ball with Shelley Silver or else you're not going to get the money.
Look, if the government can prove the linkage between the connection with Silver and his law firm and the grants that are being issued, then Silver's got a lot to worry about. The point I'm trying to make is that it is not at all uncommon for law firms to hire former judges, former politicians, even people who are sitting as politicians, to work as of counsel to a law firm, not because they have any great legal ability, but because they have the ability to be a rainmaker, to generate business for the law firm. If that's all the government's proof is, that he was acting as a rainmaker, no crime, no foul. It's if he was abusing his position as a state legislator.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
From my read, you read the complaint, and I know the complaint isn't a conviction, Mike, but it certainly looked like he did, or at least that's the clear indication.
And the fact that the doctor seems to be cooperating, I mean, so I think you're right, and I agree with you. The fact is, so he had a job where he didn't do anything and got paid for it. You know, let's be honest, half America has a job where they sit at a desk and still get a paycheck. But I don't think that's the crime. The crime is he did take, it's very simple, taxpayer money, $500,000, to a doctor. A doctor then referred his patients to the firm that paid him. You could argue that that $500,000 just went through a circular system and wound up back in his pocket. That's his problem. That's the same thing that got Vinny Leibel when it came to his foundation. He directed state dollars to his foundation. His foundation found money back into his pocket. It's the same scenario. It's happened time and time again. That's what I think from the public's perspective, and also as far as like getting your head around what he actually did, that's the clearest example of sort of the potential, the alleged corruption here.
And I don't want to jump ahead, if I could, because I want to do in the next segment here about the consequences in Albany and about how, I mean, seismic. But to me, you guys have touched on the more offensive part of this, that we have to see how this works. And on the face of it, every regular schmo, you say, wait a minute. Here's a guy getting paid by we the people, okay? And he's using his office and his influence and taxpayer money in a separate fund, and he's lining his pockets. And we don't know what's legal and what's not. On the face of it, it's just so wrong. And yet, we have to now decipher, well, wait a second. Even though he works there for 4 days a week in theory, full time, 1 day a week, he's an attorney, doesn't really do any legal work here, but he's using his office as the speaker to not only get clients, move money around. And now, is that illegal or is it not? I mean, Dominic, it's so beyond the smell test that it's wrong that we have to now kind of parse, well, maybe he didn't report it. Maybe that's where he's going to get in trouble. No. I mean, you know, this is what's screwed up about Albany. You don't pay these guys what's really a full-time salary. So now you say, okay, do what you got to do on the side. Who thinks in their right mind, what attorney is really worth the salt if he works a half a day a week? He's going there because of influence and access. And we don't know anything about it because Albany won't let us have transparency. What did I say that's wrong?
Well, no, everything you said is right. I mean, I put it this way. It's a row of dominoes that's about to fall.
Oh.
With Silver, I mean, assumption of innocence.
We're going to learn about allocution in the next segment and how that's going to work here.
But I mean, but when you look at this, and one other area that they may have Silver on, he repeatedly told journalists that none of his law clients had business with the state. That's not accurate.
Not even close to being accurate.
And see, he kept, allegedly, he kept all these things private because, and you make a good point, you could see the circle. And if he knew that if journalists had all that information, we could easily put it together.
Yep.
Right.
Andrew, anything on the legal aspect of this? And again, we approach this more on the journalistic side than as attorneys. We'll get into politics in a second, but on the legal side.
I just have a question for Bill. If the money exchanged, is that enough to show that there was a quid pro quo, or that he was essentially, they have to show that there was intent, that there was a specific deal, I'm giving you this money in exchange for this act?
Look, the gravamen and essence of the charge is that he had a corrupt arrangement, the result of which is the public was deprived of the intangible value of his honest services. And in exchange for his not providing those honest services, he received money.
But without a smoking gun, without something that says, maybe one of the participants or something in writing that says this is the arrangement, it doesn't sound like there's necessarily enough to put him away.
You might assume, though, that the doctor
right.
might be that smoking gun.
I agree with you, but I mean, I think
done a deal if he wasn't going to get the doctor
I think that there are some co-conspirators who are not identified by name. There are some lawyers who are not identified by name, but the complaints.
Oh, we know too, Bill.
I know. But
White's in Luxembourg,
well,
and that law firm and how things went down there, that's certainly, I think the next guys, they're going to have some questions.
No
from
question,
the
but when in answer to your question, you know, it seems to me that the government, the prosecutor, certainly feels confident that they have the witnesses or the evidence to paint the picture of the smoking gun.
Yep.
And if that is correct, then Sheldon Silver's got a lot of problems facing him.
And we're going to pick up there on the other side of this break. There's been calls in every editorial page in this city here that it's time that Shelley Silver steps down here. Will he resign? And beyond that, what about the consequences for one Andrew Cuomo? And what about how business is done in Albany potentially going forward? We're going to get into all of that. And what if the man on your screen decides to make a deal with Mr. Bahara? What could potentially come out of that, let's say, exchanging of information? We'll be right back. Stay with us.